The Nib is Waverley Council's National Literary Award.
Books have become even more of an invaluable commodity. They provide comfort, strength, and inspiration.
We're very excited to be here. A huge congratulations to everyone involved.
The Nib Award is truly something special.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award. My name is Emily Scott, and I'm the General Manager of Waverley Council. Thank you for joining us. I'm speaking from the home of the Nib Award, Waverley Library in Sydney's eastern suburbs. On behalf of Waverley Council, I would like to acknowledge the Bidjigal and Gadigal people who traditionally occupied the Sydney coast. I would also like to pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, both past, present, and to welcome all First Nations people who are joining us online today. When we gathered at this time last year, we hoped that the worst of our COVID-19 challenges were behind us. However, as nomination for this year's Nib Awards closed, Sydney went into lockdown, followed by many other parts of the country. Throughout this time, many of us have lent on the wonderful words of writers for comfort, entertainment, or escape. At the same time, the book industry has been tested, with the pandemic responsible for cancelling writers' festivals and events nationally, and literally closing the doors on hundreds of bookshops. The Nib Award is one of Waverley Council's most prestigious cultural offerings, and we are proud to present the program again in 2021, continuing our strong tradition of supporting the arts despite all of this year's challenges. I'd like to recognise the generous assistance of the Nib Advisory Group and the extraordinary dedication of our Nib judges, who so tirelessly pivoted around the disruptions. I also acknowledge the valuable support of our principal sponsors, Mark and Evette Moran, and our wonderful community partner, Gertrude and Alice Bookstores and Cafe, all of whom have helped make this year's Nib Award possible. The Nib was established in 2002 to promote and directly reward Australian writers, acknowledging the often costly investment and long, lonely hours spent researching their work. Its existence highlights the invaluable symbiotic relationship that culture and community share. As we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Nib Award in the shadow of the global pandemic, the significance of such an award has never been more apparent. The Nib remains the only award of its kind presented by a local government authority in Australia. Well done to every author who was nominated for this year's award, and congratulations to all of our winners. High profile, not so well known, and first-time authors have all featured in the Nib's honour roll over the years, with previous award winners including Helen Garner, Christopher Koch, Gideon Haig, Claire Wright and Rebecca Giggs. Who will this year's winners be? To lead us through the proceedings, I welcome Walkley-award winning journalist, writer, TV presenter and soon-to-be published author Jan Fran.
Thank you, Emily. I am so happy to be here. Happy 20th anniversary to the Nib Award, and congratulations to Waverley Council and to everyone involved in the longevity of this fabulous award. The Nib Award is really something to be celebrated. It is a project of the people, brought to life through the vision and hard work of community member Chris Haywood, patron of the Friends of Waverley Library and championed by the Friends, driven and invested in by Waverley Council and supported right throughout the years by many local writers, businesses, arts organisations and literature lovers nationally. In 2021, the Nib Award is pleased to present a total prize offering of $28,500. Tonight, we will meet the 6 finalists for this year's Nib Award as they each receive the Alex Buzo Shortlist Prize. We'll discover which of these finalists has won this year's Nib People's Choice Prize and announce the winner of the $20,000 Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award. The old saying goes, believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. But in the case of this year's Nib Award finalists, you can certainly believe everything you read. And this is because of the Nib's distinct focus on recognising excellence in research in the creation of a quality work of literature. Other criteria that Nib Award judges consider include readability and value to the community. This is not an award just for research itself, but for the use that research is put to. It is an acknowledgement of well-researched narratives that respect the needs of the reader. Nominations are open to writers of all experience and genres nationally for titles published in the last financial year. 150 nominations were received this year from right across the country. From this vast and diverse collection of titles, just 6 finalists who best embodied the all-important criteria were identified by the judging panel. On this year's panel were Katarina Cosgrove, an award-winning writer and author based in beautiful Noosa, Queensland, Lee Kaufman, living in Australia's City of Literature, Melbourne, although don't tell Sydney that. Lee is a much commended author, mentor, writing teacher and speaker. And finally, Jamie Grant, acclaimed poet, anthologist and literary reviewer. Sydney-based Jamie has a long connection to the award as both a founding Nib committee member and judge. To deliver this year's judges' report and to give us an insight into the shortlisted titles, Nib Award head judge Mr. Jamie Grant.
2 years of on and off lockdowns have had one striking effect. More people have found the time to finish the books they always meant to write. And as a result, the judges of this year's Nib had a greater number of nominations to consider than ever before. Over half a dozen authors who have been shortlisted in past years returned with new works, and as usual, a diverse range of subject matter has been explored, from the maze-like streets of Prague to the plains of Africa, and from Uluru to the great rivers of Australia's eastern coast. 2 books about China compete with the biography of a popular singer. All of this has been done in the course of honouring the inspiration of my friend Alex Buzo, who first thought of a prize that recognised the part played by research and libraries in the life of working writers, who devised the unique set of criteria that the judges use, and who is no longer with us. Research, readability, value to the community and literary merit are the qualities that can be found among the 6 books on our shortlist.
Thank you, Jamie. This year's Mark and Evette Moran Nib Award finalists and recipients of the $1,000 Alex Buzo Shortlist Prize are Ramona Koval, A Letter to Layla, Travels to Our Deep Past and Near Future, published by Text Publishing.
The former ABC presenter Ramona Koval became interested in humanity's nearest animal relatives, the apes, when she realised that she had a handy home developmental psychology laboratory in which to make close observations of one example of my subject's species. This was her youngest grandchild, the Layla of her book's title. As the author interviews experts and reads in greater depth about the evolutionary branch that led to us, in parallel with her explorations of archaeology, anthropology and DNA, she returns continually to her grandchild's ongoing growth. Having led us through the history of our evolution, Koval explores the future in her concluding chapters.
Hi, I'm Ramona Koval. So delighted that my book, A Letter to Layla, has been shortlisted for the 2021 Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award. The book's a sweeping account of our entire human family. We now face some pretty tricky problems of our own making, like global warming and the first in a series of pandemics, and we're the only ones in a position to do anything about them. So I wanted to discover how we got to be as we are, because the deep history of human beings, the clues hidden in the past, are relevant to understanding our present and how we might shape our future. Telling this story meant researching a range of specialist areas, talking with world experts, and writing to find a way to make complex ideas intriguing and understandable to the general reader. And with each encounter, I learned something unexpected about being human, and that there's more to life than appears on the surface of things.
Luke Stegman, Amnesia Road, Landscape, Violence and Memory, published by New South Publishing.
Stegman's insistence that we should not overlook the crimes committed by early colonial settlers in Queensland, or the ravaged sites of Spain in 1936, where villages would turn against villagers, means that the content of his book is of unquestionable value. But the content also is only a part of the author's achievement. The most important feature of this extraordinary work is the richness, depth and aphoristic balance of its literary style.
Hello, my name's Luke Stegman. It's an enormous surprise and honour to receive this Alex Buzo Shortlist Prize as part of the Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award for 2021. My book, Amnesia Road, is about landscape, violence and memory. It examines two historic locations, the frontier of southwest Queensland in the mid-19th century and rural southern Spain at the commencement of the 1936-39 Civil War. Winning this award would be exciting, would be fantastic, most of all because it would bring a new group of readers to the book, and I think it would therefore mean more people engaging in the often difficult thinking about our past, and that I think would be a good thing.
Gabrielle Carey, Only Happiness Here, in Search of Elizabeth von Arnim, published by UQP.
Mary Beauchamp was born in Sydney and was a cousin of the New Zealand-born writer Catherine Mansfield, whose real name was Kathleen Beauchamp. In her early 20s, she was taken on a tour of Europe by her parents, and when she was invited to give a musical recital in Rome, the audience included a German music lover, Count von Arnim, who pursued her until she agreed to marry him. She possessed a rare ability to discover contentment with her life, an ability she expressed as she began to write and publish best-selling fiction, anonymously at first, and then under the name Elizabeth von Arnim. Her work has continued to be reprinted to this day, and her career has been described by several other writers, but Carey's approach takes a fresh new slant, both in the thoroughness of her research, the effortless clarity of her prose style, and in the way she relates her own life, with its frankly admitted mistakes and failures, to her subject's courageous pursuit of the happiness in the book's title, despite all obstacles and setbacks.
I humbly and gratefully acknowledge the receipt of the Alex Buzo Shortlist Prize. This has a very special significance to me because Alex played a pivotal role in my development as a professional writer. Many years ago, as a teenager in the early 70s, I met Alex at a young people's playwriting weekend. That weekend could be considered the beginning of my career. Alex was encouraging and generous, and it was through him that I met the woman also attending the weekend, who was to become the scriptwriter as well as the producer of the Puberty Blues feature film. Alex represented all that is good in writers, creativity and a generous impulse to help and foster the creative spirit in others. I therefore offer my heartfelt thanks to the man who made this prize possible.
Tim Olsen, Son of the Brush, a memoir published by Allen and Unwin.
6 years ago, our shortlist included Darlene Bunge's biography of the celebrated artist John Olsen. That subject, one might presume, ought to have been exhausted. But Olsen's son, Tim, in Son of the Brush, offers a unique perspective on the same material. John Olsen's life as Tim was growing up was chaotic and nomadic, and Tim observes that from the age of 7, he saw things that a child really should not see.
It is a great honour to be awarded the Alex Buzo Shortlist Award for the Mark and Evette Moran Literary Award. It is great to see my name amongst other great authors and great books. It's humbling to see my book amongst them. I want to thank Waverley Council and Also, I want to thank Tom Gallant from Allen and Unwin, who patiently allowed me the time to get this book to where it is. And also Sue Hine, who also was part of its genesis when working for Allen and Unwin way back 6 years ago. I want to thank my life coach, Victoria Mills, who told me that I had a book in me, and her friend Melanie Kane, who also put me forward to Allen and Unwin. But mostly I want to thank my family for helping me have something to write, but also ultimately Kylie Norton, who did an incredible job with all my writing to help me piece it together into a memoir, which I'm extremely proud of. I want to thank all those people from the bottom of my heart in receiving this award, so thank you.
Sarah Krasnostein, The Believer. Published by Text Publishing.
The believer of the title is, it should be noted, singular. The reader must decide whether it refers just to one of the multiple interview subjects or to the author herself. The result is a book that is of undoubted value to the community in that it resembles a tapestry of human experience in extreme circumstances, forcing us to examine the depths of our own beliefs.
Hello, I'm Sarah Krasnostein, and I'm thrilled to accept the 2021 Alex Buzzo Shortlist Prize for my book, The Believer. It took me 4 years to research and write The Believer, which weaves together the true stories of 6 extraordinary, ordinary people to tell a 7th story about how deep and abiding commonalities can be found within the greatest differences. I'm deeply grateful to be a finalist for the Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award and to be in such wonderful company on the shortlist. I'd like to thank the award administrators and judges, Text Publishing, my editor Mandy Brett, and my husband and children who kept me inspired through the years of writing this book.
Kate Holden, The Winter Road, a story of legacy, land, and a killing at Croppa Creek. Published by Black Ink Books.
In The Winter Road, Kate Holden delivers much more than a true crime story. Murderer and victim are treated with equal sympathy, and their histories are carefully revealed, while the landscape and its past inhabitants are as important a part of this impressively researched and well-written narrative as the central incident itself.
This is so exciting. I'm really, really pleased. I wrote The Winter Road over the last 4 years. It came out in May this year, and it was a huge amount of work. I came to write the story of a murder, which was the murder of Glenn Turner, an environmental officer who was killed by the farmer Ian Turnbull in 2014. Glenn was killed for investigating illegal land clearing, and what I thought was going to be a true crime story turned out to be an epic of Australian history. So the book looks at the crime, the fallout, the consequences, and then also goes outwards and backwards into Australian history, looking at all of the ways we have related to land in this country since first settlement and dispossession of First Nations peoples.
A very big congratulations to all the Alex Buzzo Shortlist Prize recipients. So, we've heard from the judges and met the finalists themselves, but now is the time to discover just who the public have decided is the most worthy of the winner's title and the $2,500 cash prize. To announce this year's Nib People's Choice Prize winner, I welcome back General Manager of Waverley Council, Emily Scott.
Thank you, Jan. This year, hundreds of book lovers from all over Australia took time to vote online for the Nib Award finalist they think is most deserving of the recognition. And the winner of the 2021 Nib People's Choice Prize is, congratulations, Tim Olsen, Son of a Brush, a memoir.
Joking. Wow. I must say it's also a great honour to be awarded the People's Choice Award. I'm extremely grateful to everybody who delved into my book and enjoyed it. I'm deeply touched that people are interested in my life enough to do so. I'm very grateful for Evette and Mark Moran for, again, putting this prize up as well. And again, I thank Tom Gallant, Sue Hine, Christine Farmer, Victoria Mills, Melanie Kane and Kylie Norton, who really helped me put this together. But I really want to thank all of you who voted for me And I'm really, really touched that you were moved to vote for me. Thank you.
The public have spoken. Congratulations, Tim Olsen and Alan and Unwin. And thank you so much to everyone who took the time to support their favourite finalists. Every vote can make a difference. And this year, we have to tell you, the polls were extremely tight. A special mention goes to A Letter to Layla and Ramona Koval, who was a very close runner-up. Mark and Evette Moran are the co-founders of Mark Moran Group. They believe age is to be celebrated and enjoyed. Winners of many prestigious awards in both retirement living and elder care, their commitment to excellence, care and community connection are setting benchmarks in Australia and beyond. Moran is a name synonymous with quality care and the arts in Australia. So to announce this year's winner of the $20,000 Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award, please welcome Sapphira Moran.
I'm Sapphira Moran, and my family are proud supporters of the Waverley Council and the Mark and Evette Moran Nib Awards of 2021. Congratulations to all finalists. And the winner of the 2021 Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award is Luke Stegman, Amnesia Road. Congratulations.
Oh, you're joking. Oh, my goodness me. I would just mention three people. One is a historian in Spain called Francisco Espinosa, who led me onto many important contacts there. In Australia, particularly Philippa McGuinness, formerly the publisher at New South, Pip was brave enough to take on this manuscript and believe in it from the word go. And you know, I can't thank her enough, and in fact the whole team at New South for everything they've done to bring this book into the world and promote it. I'd also like to thank Waverley Council and, of course, the Mark and Evette Moran Literary Award for this enormous honour. And finally, of course, I always thank my daughter, Eva. She's in Spain. She spent 15 months locked down under COVID in pretty awful conditions. And, you know, it's heartbreaking that I've been here and not able to see her during that time. And she was on a lot of the journeys with me through Spain and some of the journeys in Outback Australia as well. So I always give a shout out to her.
Luke Stegman is a cultural historian based in rural southeast Queensland. He's written on art, politics and history for a wide range of Australian and Spanish publications, and is the author of The Beautiful Obscure, published in 2017. In 2018, he received the Malus Pena Award in recognition of his outstanding contribution to the development of cultural relations between Australia and Spain. Amnesia Road, Landscape, Violence and Memory was released in March by New South Publishing. It was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's History Award, Australian History Prize, and won the Queensland Literary Award for non-fiction. And now, the Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award. Were you surprised? Were you expecting to get this news today?
I was not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Hence my head going in my hands. I just couldn't believe it.
Talk us through what winning this particular award means to you in this moment.
Well, it means a huge amount, and I've got to say that for me, it's really all about having worked really, really hard on something that you think is important to talk about and tell people about, and having worked on it both from the historical angle and then from the language angle, in terms of the way the prose is written, and then also having worked across 2 countries in 2 languages and with some very, very, very difficult historical material. I think it's just an enormous privilege to think that this is now going to reach a lot more people, and that for me that's the most wonderful thing. To have your work, which you put so much effort into, have to have it recognised in this way is just wonderful. I'm quite speechless, actually. I'm quite speechless.
Well, you can crack the champagne later, no doubt. Once this interview's over,
Indeed.
Crack it open, have a drink. But before that, let's talk a little bit about this book. I do want to get into it. I do want to ask you a question though first before we get into it. Now, you are described as a Hispanist, and I'm deeply ashamed to say that I actually had to Google what that meant. And it's someone who is an expert or a student in the language and culture of Spain. So talk me through why Spain. What was it that attracted you to that language and that culture in the first place?
Jen, I was travelling through Europe many years ago, as young Australians do often, back in those marvellous pre-COVID days, and I was travelling around, sort of backpacking through Europe, and I entered Spain, and I just had an immediate feeling which I couldn't quite ever really put my finger on, but in a sense of this, I was always coming back to a second home. And it's curious because there's nothing Spanish in my bloodlines. I'm Prussian and Scottish and English and so on. So there's nothing Spanish there, but there was a real sense of having found a place where I really, really understood the people, loved the language, found the history, the scenery, the cuisine, everything just completely marvelous. But above all, the wonderful generosity and openness of the Spanish people. And I thought that I would like to go back and spend a little bit of time living there. So I returned back to where I was then living, which was Sydney at the time, and worked for a couple of years, earned some money, went back, and that was in the late 80s, and Spain has now been an intimate part of my life. Here was I thinking it'll be a year or two, and it's been 35 years now.
It's a wonderful literary work, but it's almost a piece of journalism. You're drawing so much on historical documents and records and journals and publications, and you're interweaving them with your own observations. But, there is a certain, degree, I suppose, of journalism perhaps to your work. What was that research and writing process like for you?
It was kind of a cumulative process, I think. And it's interesting you asked that because I have done journalism work over the years. Not a lot, but I've sort of had some basic training in that, and I've written across a wide range of genres over the years as well. So it was an accumulative thing, really. I think when I started out, Jan, I didn't really realise exactly what the scope of the book was going to be. I just knew that there were a couple of historical questions that I wanted to explore in the 2 countries that I call home. I wanted to explore those historical questions, and I wanted to explore them within the context of beautiful landscapes. And as I began researching, and it involved an enormous amount of reading, and as you know, in both Australia and in Spain, it meant going to smaller towns and going into library archives and digging up material which often has never seen the light of day, because often it's very humble stuff. It's not academic literature. It's just journals and diaries and letters of people, and it's uncovering those, by and large, completely untold stories. That the book started to take on that shape, if you like, of having that sort of journalist, that reportage element to it, rather than just being a work of literary non-fiction.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm saying what the book is or was sort of changed as I was writing it.
It's a very evocative book. It's haunting in a sense. I hope I'm using the right words to describe it. And I've sort of got this image of you in these landscapes, just kind of sitting quietly, taking it all in. Am I on the money? Have I romanticised that, or did that really happen?
Perhaps a little bit. It's funny you mention that, Jan, because there are parts of the book where I can still now identify exactly how that particular phrase or that image occurred. And often I would just be driving along. I'd always have a notebook and pen beside me, as I always do. And often I would see something, I would reflect on something, and I would just pull over the side of the road for 5 minutes and scribble down notes, and then, put the car back into gear and drive off again. I drove tens and tens of thousands of kilometres researching this book, and often, covering the same area again and again and again. But I would often just pull over, scribble notes, and then of an evening in a hotel or a motel somewhere, I would, type them up into my laptop, and then later back at home, a few weeks later, would sort of start to compose them into a kind of narrative. So I can still see, where there's a description of particular of birds or a particular field or particular trees, I can still, in most cases, remember exactly where I was and how that description happened.
Right.
But it wasn't quite as romantic as you make it sound.
That's all right. I'm still going to imagine that in my... You haven't ruined the fantasy. It's all good. Your book interweaves violence with landscape, and in some ways they're sort of inextricably linked. You talk about the violence that occurred on the Australian frontier in Queensland, namely, and also the violence that happened in 1930s Spain under the Franco dictatorship. Why did you decide in this book to compare and contrast what might seem like two very disparate places?
That's a really, really good question, and a number of people have asked me that. Why particularly these? I think Queensland's where I'm from originally, where I live, and although I've spent a lot of my life outside of Queensland, but it is where my Australian roots are. And I realised that I really wanted to explore the history of a particularly neglected part of Queensland, which is the southwestern corner of Queensland, out near places like Cunnamulla and Thargomindah and Charleville and so on. And so the obvious thing there was to take on, face up to what had happened to the Indigenous people in that, because you can't celebrate the landscape without acknowledging that this had been the sacred home to people prior to our presence here. In terms of Spain, I guess, you can pick any number of violent episodes from that country's history, but I think the Civil War is one that has been very present in contemporary discourse, because there's been a lot of legislation over the last decade which attempts to come to terms with a violent past, just as we have seen in Australia with the apology and attempts at reconciliation, the Uluru Statement, and so on. So there are these legislative attempts in both countries to say, look, how do we really come to terms with our past? And so I focused on that particular element in Spanish history, and also because it's not quite. There are still people, not many now, but there are still people who lived those years. There's a lot of extraordinary oral testimony, and a lot of it has never been properly considered. And the more I considered them, the more I saw commonalities between the two. The way sudden violence was inflicted on absolutely innocent people. And one of the points I try to make in the book is, we talk about the frontier wars, we talk about the Civil War, and I say, in both cases, the large number of victims, it was not war, it was murder, which is not the same thing. War implies two sort of competing parties. This was indiscriminate murder of innocent people in both cases.
You bring it up quite early in the book. You bring it up as a cliche, but I must say I really liked it, because it resonated with me quite a bit, where you say there is nowhere like elsewhere to make sense of one's home. And I felt that a lot, often being outside of Australia. I wonder, what has Spain taught you about Australia and vice versa? What have you learnt from being outside of those spaces that you call home?
That would take me hours to.
Well, we don't have hours, I'm afraid, Luke. It's got to be truncated.
I think on the obvious level, I think they living across both countries has taught me how to appreciate the human qualities of both people, of Spaniards and Australians. I think we're both obviously extraordinarily complex nations, both nations of people of fundamental goodwill, both nations now with a reasonably strong sort of a democratic present, both countries coming to terms with violent past, but both countries with, as I say, I think fundamentally very, very good people who are trying to make their best way in the world. And living across the two countries, and there's an extraordinary amount of cultural and scientific exchange between our two countries these days. It's allowed me to, I think, to appreciate the really important human qualities of the people in both. Certainly, Spain also has taught me immersing myself very, very deeply in a culture which has those hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's very, very long and deep religious traditions. It's taught me a lot about understanding the human psyche, I think, and the human soul. I think it's probably not too much to say that.
Your book is, you know, it can be a hard read because you're talking about subject matters that are, you know, they're pretty intense. They can be pretty dark. There's descriptions of brutal violence. Was it challenging for you looking deeply into this subject matter?
It was challenging, and it was also at times personally, you know, pretty disturbing. Some of the material, as you say, is very, very hard to stomach. I've got to say, I didn't want to hold back because I think it's important to put on the page, you know, essentially how brutal some of this history is. But certainly, it's certainly also true in the case of the Spanish material. There are a couple of episodes that I simply decided not to put in the book because they were too awful. And that's not to suggest that there wouldn't have been equally awful things in the case of what happened to the Indigenous people in southwest Queensland, but there's simply not as much of a record. In the case of Spain, we're talking about something which is still less than 100 years ago, and there were a lot more eyewitnesses, and there were even photographs and so on.
Yeah.
So that violence is much more present, but certainly there were some elements that I decided were just too awful to put into the book.
You write in the book, the point is not to condemn or moralise, but then this is in reference, I should say, to Spain and the dictatorship in Spain. The point is not to condemn or moralise, but simply to know, to say this happened, and we recognise these acts have shaped the way we are today in ways both obvious and at the same time unknown. Is part of, I guess, digging up the dead, for lack of a better phrase, is part of that we maybe hope to understand ourselves a bit more?
You know, so much of what happens has happened before. You know, it's kind of like there's not, you know, that thing of history going around in cycles, and you know, there not really being anything new under the sun. And I think often things happen to us, social, historical, cultural, and so on, that sometimes take us by surprise. But if we understand history and read history more, we'd realise these things have pretty much always happened before in slightly different contexts, in slightly different ways. But yes, you're right. It's about the more that we know, I think the less we're going to be taken by surprise by what might happen in the present and the future.
You've said that history requires time and deep and extensive reading. It requires long, slow thought. All of these things which are not at all appropriate for social media. So I kind of want to bring this discussion of history into the digital age, because I know that's something that kind of spurred you along. In what ways do you believe that social media might be perhaps eroding or impeding our ability to fully understand history, and what can we do about it?
I'm not sure. I don't want to pretend to say I know that what we can do about it, but I have observed, and I observe it in myself. You know, social media, the digital world is very much predicated on the now, on the instantaneous, often on the simplified, and those things I think go against the grain of what you require for history. You can't have history in small, easy, instantaneous packages. And to understand something like the last 150 years of the history in southwestern Queensland, it requires patience. That's the thing that I think social media doesn't give us, is patience, because you need time, as I say, time to read, and I think the willingness as well. You have to be prepared to open yourself up to say, I'm going to take the time to explore this issue in as much detail as I can. And so I might spend 6 hours rather than 5 minutes, just to give an example. I think that's a really, really necessary thing to do. How we overcome that, I'm not entirely sure, because I think, social media is continually predicated on that instantaneity.
Yeah. God, I wish you had an answer to that question, because I'm dying to know. I think we're all in a similar boat of, feeling as though our lives on the internet have perhaps really impeded our ability to be present and perhaps our ability to be patient, yes, which, as you say, is required for any kind of deep thought and reflection. A massive congratulations to you once again for being the recipient of this fantastic award, and I really hope you enjoy that glass or 10 of champagne.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thanks for a wonderful interview. It's been really, I really appreciate the fact that people read the book and read it in a deep and careful and nuanced way, because that's kind of one of the points of the book, is that you have to do more of that kind of reading. And I really appreciate that you've taken the time to do that and asked some really quite fabulous questions. Thanks, Jan. Thank you.
This brings us to the end of the event. Congratulations once again to all 2021 winning authors, and a special thank you to UQP, Black Ink Books, Text Publishing, Allen & Unwin and New South Publishing for publishing this year's remarkable titles. On behalf of the Mark and Evette Moran Nib Literary Award and Waverley Council, I'd like to congratulate and thank all of those who nominated a book in this year's program. Thank you to our principal sponsors, Mark and Evette Moran. Thank you also to the Nib Awards community partner, Gertrude and Alice Bookstore Cafe in Bondi. Wherever you are watching this from, you can purchase all of this year's winning Nib books from Gertrude and Alice online at gertrudeandalice.com.au. Submissions for next year's award will be accepted in April 2022. Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye.